Hello. My name is Melina Harrow, sister to the woman who slapped me in front of a full classroom, hijacked my research, and once, when we were kids, dislocated my arm because I spelled photosynthesis faster than she did. If you think that's bad, just wait. The day she grabbed my throat in the lab? That was the day she stopped mistaking my silence for weakness. The projector light flickered against the whiteboard, painting the room in cold flashes of blue. My fingers tightened around the laser pointer, pulse steady only because I forced it to be. I could feel Isolde standing beside me, too close, her perfume cutting through the sterile scent of ethanol and coffee. She was smiling for the students, voice calm, confident. And wrong. Actually, I said softly, pointing at the chart. The baseline. The word never finished. A sharp crack echoed through the room. My head jerked sideways. The laser pointer slipped from my hand, clattering across the tile. A beaker toppled, shattered, and a collective gasp rose from 30 stunned throats. For a heartbeat, no one moved. My skin stung, not from the slap, but from the heat of their stares. I could feel them holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't do anything. I straightened, smoothed the hem of my lab coat, and forced my voice into something calm. "Let's take 5, I said quietly. Not a single student left their seat. One boy, trembling, lifted his phone slightly, pretending to adjust the camera. Recording. Isolde's face didn't change. She placed the cap back on a marker, turned to the class, and said, "We'll reconvene when emotions have settled. Please remember professionalism." Professionalism. She said it as if I had been the one who lost control. When the students began to file out, whispers followed like smoke. I walked to the sink, turned on the water, and rinsed the back of my neck. My reflection in the metal surface looked foreign, cheeks flushed, eyes hollow. The sound of dripping water blurred into another memory, the kind that sneaks up when you least expect it. I was 8 again, barefoot in the backyard. Isolde was taller then, faster, her voice already carrying that sharp, cutting tone she'd later perfect in lecture halls. I had just beaten her at a spelling game. She smiled, walked behind me, and twisted my arm until I screamed. "Don't ever win again," she hissed. The pop of the joint was faint, almost delicate. Later, when Mom asked what happened, Isolde said, "She fell." I learned not to contradict her after that. The bone healed crooked, but what never mended was something smaller, invisible. The quiet understanding that truth meant pain. Back in the present, I dried my face with a paper towel, threw it away, and walked out of the lab. My neck ached where her hand had brushed me. I didn't go home immediately. I drove aimlessly through the tree-lined streets of Chapel Hill, passing students in graduation gowns taking photos under the oak trees. Laughter drifted through open windows. It was the kind of laughter that didn't belong to me anymore. By sunset, I found myself in front of my mother's house without remembering how I got there. The porch light glowed dimly, just bright enough to reveal the same hydrangeas I'd planted years ago. I still brought her mail sometimes, small gestures that made me feel like family hadn't completely dissolved. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and old memories. Mom's television murmured from the living room, a talk show host laughing too loudly. I placed the small package on the console and turned toward the hallway, the photo wall that had been there since before I could spell my own name. The frames lined up like evidence in a trial, birthdays, graduations, Isolde's awards. My steps slowed as I reached the middle row. There used to be one photo of us together, 2 girls in school uniforms, our arms slung around each other, sunlight turning our hair gold. It was gone. I leaned closer. The nail marks were still there on the wallpaper, faint but undeniable. In its place hung a new picture, Mom and Isolde, smiling in elegant dresses at the university gala. I recognized the pearls. I recognized the dress Mom said she'd never wear again. No trace of me. Not even a corner of my sleeve. I whispered to the empty hall, "I haven't been forgotten. I've been erased." My voice sounded strange, like it came from someone else's throat. From the living room, I heard my mother's laugh, light, easy, the kind reserved for guests. I turned the corner and froze. On the TV, a clip was playing from the same gala. I saw Isolde on stage, standing under golden lights, holding a plaque. Behind her, projected 10 feet high, was a photo of me. Me, in uniform. My army jacket. The one from 2005, the one still stained with sand from the hurricane zone. Isolde smiled to the audience. "My sister used to play soldier before she found science. Laughter. A ripple of it. My stomach clenched. I could hear Mom clapping in the recording. I stood there, motionless, staring at my own face on the screen, younger, proud, unbroken. They'd turned it into a prop. I stepped closer, lowered the volume, and felt the room shrink around me. The couch. The coffee table. The rug we used to lie on during snow days. Everything still smelled the same, lavender candles and history rewritten. The front door creaked. Mom called out, "Malina? Is that you?" Her voice was soft, tentative. "Yes," I said. My tone was calm, too calm. She appeared in the hallway, apron tied around her waist. Her eyes darted from the TV to me, then back again. "You saw the video. Wasn't it wonderful?" "Wonderful," I echoed. "You mean the part where she used my photo?" "She mentioned you," Mom said quickly, as if that fixed everything. "You're part of her story, sweetheart." "I was her story," I said quietly. "Now I'm her background." Mom sighed, rubbing her hands on the apron. "Don't start this again, Malina. She's worked so hard." "So did I." The air thickened between us. "She represents this family now," she said finally. "You know how the university works. They chose her." "Of course they did. They always did." I nodded once, walked to the door, and opened it. The night air rushed in, cool and clean, cutting through the polished warmth of the house. Outside, the streetlights hummed softly. My reflection glimmered faintly in the car window as I reached for the handle. For a moment, I saw the girl in the photo, the one they'd erased, and the woman she became standing side by side. I learned quietly, slowly, gently, I whispered, in ways they never imagined. The words steadied me. I started the car, the headlights carving a path through the dark. Chapel Hill's trees bent overhead, their branches heavy with spring blooms. Somewhere behind me, laughter echoed from the TV, but it was fading now, replaced by the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step. I drove without a destination, only the faint pull of what waited ahead, the truth, still buried under years of silence, waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds like nothing had happened. It was cruel how light could enter a house so easily when truth couldn't. I made coffee, though I could barely taste it. The bitterness clung to the back of my throat while my mind replayed the laughter from the video, my sister's voice, that mocking sweetness the world adored. I didn't plan to stay at my mother's house. But something kept me there, hovering between the kitchen and the living room, unable to walk away from what I'd just seen. The television screen still glowed faintly, frozen on a sold smile. Behind her, the image of me in uniform looked distorted, stretched by the light. The crowd had laughed when she called me G.I. Jane. They clapped when she said, "My sister found her place in science after playing soldier." To them, it was harmless humor, a charming anecdote to humanize the brilliant Dr. Harrow. But to me, it was a theft of the sacred. I walked closer to the screen, lowering the volume until only the static hummed. "It wasn't a costume," I whispered. The sound of my own voice startled me. I said it again, louder this time, as if repeating it could rewrite what the world had just heard. "It wasn't a costume." Mom came in, holding a dish towel. "You're still here," she said softly, like I was an unexpected guest. "I saw it all," I replied. She sighed. "Oh, honey, she didn't mean any harm. It was just a joke." Everyone laughed. "Exactly," I said. Everyone laughed. Her brow furrowed. "You're taking this too seriously. You know how she is on stage, charming, witty. People love that." I turned to her, my voice low but steady. "People love her lies. And you love watching her tell them." Her lips parted, then pressed tight. "Don't twist this, Malina. She's your sister. She was. Once." The words hung between us, heavy as the silence that followed. I left before Mom could find another excuse for her. The air outside was damp, the sky swollen with gray clouds that promised rain. As I stepped off the porch, thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, a soft growl that made my pulse stutter. By the time I reached my car, the sound of a helicopter echoed faintly overhead. My hands froze on the door handle. The air thickened. For a moment, I wasn't standing in my mother's driveway. I was back in Louisiana. Water up to my waist. The smell of diesel and decay. The weight of a child in my arms, small, lifeless. The sirens were distant then too, faint against the rush of wind and floodwater. I'd carried that body for 6 blocks before finding a medic. I could still feel the child's hair against my chin, could still hear the mother's scream when she realized it was too late. The memory slammed into me so hard I leaned against the car for balance. I could taste salt on my lips, not from the rain, but from something buried deep. They saw a joke. I saw corpses. And no one ever said thank you. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in Chapel Hill. The rain had started, soft and rhythmic against the windshield. I slid into the driver's seat and waited for the trembling to fade. It took longer than it should have. Healing never came easy when the wound kept reopening. By the time I got home, night had fallen. The house was quiet, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock filling the space. I set my phone on the counter, poured a glass of water, and tried to breathe normally. Then the phone buzzed. A message from Isolde. If you speak out, you'll destroy Mom. And this family. I stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen. No apology. No remorse. Just another command disguised as concern. That's not a warning, I said aloud. That's a leash. I deleted the message, but the words burned themselves into my mind. They always had a way of doing that, twisting care into control, guilt into obedience. I walked to my desk, turned on the small lamp, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen painted my hands pale blue. For a moment, I hesitated, hearing her voice again, "Don't make this worse." But worse had already arrived. I opened my encrypted drive, a vault I'd built years ago when small injustices still felt survivable. Inside were folders labeled by year, each one a scar preserved in data form. 2018, research draft reassigned. 2019, project renamed. 2020, conference omission. 2021, student complaint ignored. Each folder contained screenshots, emails, meeting notes, voice memos. Every time my name vanished from a paper or a report, I'd kept proof. At first, it was habit, a way to stay sane. Later, it became something else. Insurance. I opened a folder marked Rafia. She'd been a graduate assistant once, bright and eager, before Isolde pushed her to the edge. A voice recording played softly through my speakers, the sound of a young woman crying in a stairwell. She told me to take the blame. Said if I wanted a future, I'd do it. I can't do this anymore. I remembered finding her that day, her eyes red, her hands shaking. She'd thanked me for listening. A week later, she transferred departments. Every time they erased my name, I kept the original. I wasn't collecting revenge. I was preserving the truth. I whispered it quietly, tenderly, as if saying it out loud could make it real. My hand hovered over a new folder I'd just created. Its title glowed on the screen, Evidence, Final. I took a deep breath and began to drag files into it. One by one, years of silence found a place to belong. When I finally looked up, hours had passed. The clock showed 2:17 a.m. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle. My reflection in the window looked tired, but calmer than it had been in years. The truth was no longer buried. It was waiting. And then, somewhere between exhaustion and resolve, my phone vibrated again, a new message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. There's something you should know. Meet me after class tomorrow. No name. No context. But I knew that voice. Rafia. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. The faintest flicker of hope stirred in my chest, unfamiliar, fragile, but alive. Maybe I wasn't the only one keeping records anymore. The rain had stopped completely now. Outside, the world smelled new, as if something heavy had finally broken open. I turned off the light, closed the laptop, and whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, then." Softly. Gently. Like a promise I was finally ready to keep. Rafia stood in the hallway like she'd been waiting hours, though I knew the last class had ended only minutes ago. The fluorescent light above her flickered, washing her skin in tired tones. Her arms were folded across her chest, but it wasn't defiance, it was a shield. I had just locked the lab door behind me, still reeling from hours spent dodging glances and answering questions with silence. When I turned and saw her there, I started to speak. She beat me to it. "If you leave we have no chance." Her voice barely rose above the hum of the air vents, but I heard it clearer than anything all day. Not the words themselves, the weight in them. The quiet desperation of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. The way her eyes didn't blink, like she was afraid the moment would disappear. I opened my mouth, searching for a response, but found none. Her words weren't a plea for mentorship. They weren't about her thesis or the project. They were about something larger, heavier. She wasn't begging me to stay for her. She was asking me to stay for who I used to be. Softly, gently, I nodded. She exhaled like someone who'd been holding her breath all semester, gave me the smallest smile, then walked away. I stood there longer than I meant to, letting her words settle inside me. I wasn't just carrying my own story anymore. The ceremony came 2 days later. I arrived just as the auditorium filled, slipping into a seat 4 rows from the front. My name wasn't on the guest list. It never was. But I had received the campus-wide email invitation like everyone else, and I wore my faculty ID like a badge I'd earned, because I had. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the room. Velvet drapes framed the stage. Gold-trimmed programs rested in every seat. I opened mine with steady hands, scanning the pages until I saw it, Isolde Harrow, keynote honoree. Below her name, Principal Investigator, Neurochemical Innovations in Post-Trauma Recovery. I had written those words. The presentation began. Applause echoed as she stepped onto the stage, her blazer perfectly tailored, her heels clicking like punctuation. The screen behind her lit up with a title slide. My title. My data. My entire doctoral research roadmap. And then she smiled. It was a true team effort, she said, adjusting the microphone. But leadership is about vision. There was laughter. Not cruel. Not loud. Just the soft chuckle of people entertained by success. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Instead, I folded the program slowly, deliberately, like I was sealing something inside it. Something sacred. Something stolen. My hands trembled only once, then went still. After the ceremony, the hallway filled with light chatter and camera flashes. Students posed with their mentors. Deans shook hands. I slipped through the crowd unnoticed. Outside, the sky was beginning to dim. Rafia stood under the breezeway, clutching a folder of notes against her chest. She caught my eye but didn't move. I gave her a nod, and she nodded back, silent understanding passing between us like breath. My phone buzzed with unread messages. I ignored them. Instead, I drove home in silence. The air in my car was thick, but I kept the windows up. I needed the containment. The pressure. Like a seal on something about to break. At home, I bypassed the kitchen, the couch, everything that promised comfort. I went straight to the cabinet I hadn't opened in years. It took 2 keys to unlock, the top drawer and the reinforced panel at the bottom. Inside, binders, flash drives, manila folders labeled by hand. I pulled out the newest one. Its label was fresh, written that morning in block letters, Timeline of Authorship Redactions, 2018 to 2024. The edges were sharp. I had printed it myself, cross-referenced every claim. It wasn't revenge. It was proof. And it was complete. I set it down on the desk and stared at it. Softly, my mind repeated Rafia's voice, if you leave, we have no chance. I wasn't going anywhere. Later that evening, I opened my laptop. The screen lit the room like moonlight, soft and clinical. I didn't check my email. I didn't read the headlines. I opened a blank document and began writing. Not a resignation. Not a complaint. A statement. A declaration. Paragraph by paragraph, I recorded the history no one had bothered to preserve. How my name disappeared from grants. How meeting minutes were altered. How faculty memos conveniently forgot my existence. When I reached the section about the conference in Denver, the one where Isolde presented my entire research model without a single mention, I paused. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I remembered the hotel room that night, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it didn't matter. That I wasn't doing this for credit. That I was above ego. That was the night I realized I had confused humility with fear. I wrote that, too. Softly. Slowly. As truth demands. When I finished, I saved the file and backed it up 3 times. One on a flash drive. One in encrypted cloud storage. One email to myself. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair, and whispered, that's step 1. Tomorrow, I would see her. Not as her sister. Not even as a colleague. But as the woman who finally said, enough. The next day, I didn't wait for an invitation. I knew where she'd be, her office, the same room where she'd rewritten my history 1 memo at a time. By the time I reached the building, the halls were quiet, most of the staff already gone. The sound of my shoes against the tile was steady, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who'd made up her mind. I stopped outside her door. The light beneath it was still on. I turned the handle and walked in without knocking. She looked up from her laptop, startled for a heartbeat before her face smoothed into that familiar professional calm. "Malina," she said. "This isn't a good time." I closed the door behind me. The click sounded final. "You'll want to make it one." Her brows lifted, the polite mask slipping into irritation. "Excuse me?" I stepped closer, not enough to be a threat, just enough to make her meet my eyes. One more theft, one more project hijacked, one more line with my name missing, and I go public. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. "You wouldn't dare," she said finally. "This will destroy everything we built." I almost laughed. "You built nothing. You harvested. I was the field." For the first time, her voice wavered. "You don't understand the politics of this, Malina. These things are delicate." "No," I said quietly. "They're dishonest. And I'm done being delicate." The silence between us stretched long enough that I could hear the hum of her computer fan. My heart didn't race this time. My voice didn't shake. Hers did. I turned toward the door. "I'll give you a chance to fix it," I said. "That's more mercy than you ever gave me." Her tone softened, syrupy sweet. "You've always been dramatic. You see betrayal in every shadow." I paused. "You taught me how." I left her sitting there, pale and furious behind her polished desk, and didn't look back. Earlier that morning, before I'd decided to confront her, I had attended the faculty networking brunch, the one the dean's assistant guilted me into showing up for. It was held in the new glass atrium overlooking the quad, all chatter and fake laughter. My name tag had been waiting at the entrance. Dr. Mallory Holmes, Assistant, Department of Chemistry. They'd misspelled both my name and my field. It was almost funny. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. Then I folded it in half, quietly, and dropped it into the trash. No one noticed. No one ever did. At my table, someone from the grant committee leaned over. "Isolde tells us you're quite the organizer," he said. "She couldn't have pulled off the new study without your support." "Support," I repeated, letting the word sit in my mouth like something spoiled. "She's a visionary," he added cheerfully. "You must be proud." I smiled the way women are taught to, pleasant, restrained, forgettable. "Always," I said. I left before dessert. That evening, the sunset painted the windows of my office a dull gold. I opened my encrypted server, the same vault I'd built years ago, and uploaded 3 files. Isolde, authorship transfers.pdf. Audio, threat compilation.m4a. Student complaint records.csv. Each one a piece of a puzzle she thought she'd hidden. Then I began drafting the email. To Academic Integrity Committee. Subject, formal complaint and supporting evidence. I typed slowly, carefully. Each word felt heavier than the last. My fingers trembled once, then steadied. I wasn't afraid of losing my job anymore. The only thing worse than losing it was keeping it under her shadow. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. I glanced down. A message from Isolde. "Mom's upset. Stop stirring trouble. You're going to regret this." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I placed the phone face down on the desk and kept typing. For years, she'd sent messages like that, short, cutting, always framed as concern. The kind of control disguised as love that our mother had perfected and passed down like an heirloom. I finished the draft but didn't send it. Not yet. I wanted to give her one last chance to choose decency. But I already knew she wouldn't. My mind drifted back to the office confrontation. The way her voice had cracked, barely audible. The way she'd called me dramatic. I wondered if she realized that was the moment she lost her power over me. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. The world outside my window was dark now, the streetlights humming. In the distance, I could hear faint laughter from students crossing the quad, unbothered, innocent. I envied that simplicity, the freedom of not knowing betrayal firsthand. I reached for the small silver flash drive I kept hidden under the file folders. The one with every backup. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, and whispered, "This time, it's mine." Later that night, as I prepared to leave the office, I checked my phone again. Another message from her. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You've embarrassed this family enough. I typed back before I could stop myself. You embarrassed it first. I just kept the receipts. I didn't wait for a reply. Outside, the campus lights flickered like stars against the wet pavement. I walked slowly, letting the night air cool my skin. For the first time in months, I felt something like calm. When I reached my car, I glanced back at the tall building where she still sat, probably rewriting the story already. I whispered into the night, softly, "You can't edit the truth forever." It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. I drove home under the weight of that stillness. My reflection in the windshield looked older, steadier. Every mile between us felt like a breath I'd held too long finally released. Back at my house, I powered up the desktop one more time, double-checking the files. I added timestamps, labeled each folder, made sure nothing could be disputed. In the subject line of the email draft, I added one more word, confidential. I hovered over send and whispered, tomorrow. Tomorrow she'd either fix what she'd broken, or I would. Morning light cut through the blinds in narrow lines. I hadn't slept, not really. My body rested, but my mind never left that email draft waiting on the screen. I brewed coffee, the smell rich and bitter, and told myself today was the day I'd either end it or let it swallow me. When I reached the lab, the air felt strange, too still for a weekday. Students were already setting up their experiments, the low hum of conversation running beneath the sound of glassware. Rafia caught my eye from across the room. She gave a small nod, the kind that said I'm here. The door opened, and Isolde walked in mid-conversation with a younger professor. Her laughter was light, but her steps were sharp. She held a clipboard pressed to her chest like a weapon. "Malina," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "I need you to sign off on this correction for the data logs." Her tone was casual, but it wasn't a request. I wiped my hands on a towel, met her halfway, and took the clipboard. The moment my eyes landed on the form, my stomach turned. The numbers were altered, deliberately. She was fabricating the baseline again. I looked up. "This isn't correct." Her smile didn't falter. "It's a minor adjustment. The review board doesn't need to know every decimal." I shook my head. "I won't put my name on that." The laughter around the lab died instantly. Even the hum of the machines felt quieter. Her face changed, the calm slipping into something colder. "You think you're brave now?" I didn't answer. My silence was answer enough. She slammed the clipboard on the bench. The sound echoed off the glass walls. Then, too fast for thought, her hand shot out and grabbed my throat. The impact sent me backward into the counter. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My body froze the way it used to under mortar fire, instincts waiting for permission to act. Students gasped. A beaker fell, shattering against the floor. Rafia's voice broke through the noise, "Dr. Harrow, stop." But she didn't. Her nails dug into my skin. Then something inside me shifted. I wasn't in the lab anymore. I was back in that flooded street in New Orleans, dragging a soldier out from under debris, my arm burning as I twisted to lift his weight. Training took over. I grabbed her wrist, pivoted, and used her momentum against her. In one swift motion, I flipped her over the bench. The crash shook the entire room. She landed on the tile, gasping, eyes wide. The silence afterward was deafening. Every student stared, frozen between fear and disbelief. I stood there, adjusting my sleeve, the faint sting on my neck already fading. "You forgot who I am," I said quietly. But I didn't. No one moved. I looked at Rafia, who still stood near the sink, her phone clutched in her hand. "Make sure that footage doesn't get erased." She nodded, eyes wide, trembling but steady. When security arrived 10 minutes later, I was sitting calmly on the edge of the counter. Isolde was gone, she'd left before they entered, leaving behind the clipboard and the lie she wanted me to sign. The officers took statements. The students mumbled, none daring to contradict what they'd seen. One boy whispered, "She attacked her first," as if saying it out loud might cost him points in some invisible game of loyalty. When the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind to pick up the broken glass. Rafia tried to help, but I told her gently to go home. "You've done enough," I said. "Let me clean up my own mess for once." That evening, the house felt heavier than usual. I poured tea instead of wine, needing the steadiness. The phone rang before I sat down. "Mom." I knew before I answered what side she'd be on. "Malina," she said, her voice tight with restrained anger. "I just spoke to Isolde. She's shaken." What have you done? I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay level. What she did, Mom. What you always let her do. There was a pause. Then came the familiar sigh, the one that always preceded justification. You've humiliated this family. I laughed softly, bitterly. No. I stopped pretending it wasn't already humiliating. Don't you dare talk to me that way, she snapped. She's your sister. She's your project, I said quietly. And I'm done being her cleanup crew. You've always been jealous, she said, and I could almost hear the script unfolding line by line. You could have been as successful as her if you'd just learned how to work with people. I let the words pass through me. They didn't land anymore. I worked with people, Mom. I just stopped letting them work over me. She went silent. For the first time, I heard something unfamiliar in her breathing, fear, maybe, or realization. Don't call me again about her, I said. I'm not the problem you think I am. I ended the call before she could reply. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the pavement. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but not broken. I pressed a hand to my neck where her fingers had left faint marks. They would fade by morning. The memory wouldn't. Softly, I whispered to myself, enough. The next hour passed in stillness. I cleaned the cut on my palm from the shattered beaker, rinsed it under cool water until the sting dulled. The world outside seemed unnaturally calm, as if waiting for the fallout. Rafia texted me just before midnight. Everyone saw it. The video's already online. I'm sorry if that makes things worse. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. No. It makes things clear. Then I put the phone face down and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, there would be statements, reports, maybe even headlines. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was tired of bending the truth just to survive it. Healing doesn't always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like standing up while everyone else stays seated. I sat in that quiet kitchen, letting the truth settle around me. It didn't roar. It didn't need to. It simply existed. That was the last call I ever answered from her. The morning after the incident began quietly. Too quietly. The world outside looked unchanged, same gentle fog over the parking lot, same birds on the power lines, but inside my chest, everything had shifted. The air felt heavier, as if even silence carried consequence now. A cup of coffee went cold beside me as I sat at my desk. The screen of my laptop waited, bright and unblinking, the word confidential still shining in the subject line. For once, I didn't hesitate. I opened the draft and began attaching everything I had spent years protecting. The video clip. The 6-year timeline of authorship theft. Audio recordings from meetings. Minutes from faculty sessions. Anonymous student complaints, some typed in trembling language, others blunt and brave. I read through every attachment once more, breathing slowly between files. Each click sounded like punctuation to a story I had spent too long enduring. I waited years for someone else to step in, I said softly. Now I know, it had to be me. My finger hovered over the mouse for a single heartbeat. Then I pressed send. The sound was anticlimactic. Just a dull chime, then stillness. No fireworks, no relief. Just the quiet weight of knowing I could never undo it. By noon, the email had reached its target. A call came from the administration office, asking me to attend an urgent meeting. I arrived to find 3 deans and an HR representative seated at a long table, their faces a mixture of discomfort and forced composure. The room smelled faintly of paper and air conditioning. Rafia waited outside, her back straight, hands clasped, as if her steadiness could lend me courage. A dean cleared his throat. Dr. Harrow, the video has circulated. Quite rapidly, actually. Another added, we didn't expect that level of force. I met his eyes. She didn't expect someone who would finally use it. Silence followed, thick, awkward, almost reverent. None of them apologized. But something changed in the way they looked at me. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe it was respect disguised as fear. Either way, I'd take it. The HR rep took notes, his pen scratching softly. We'll need statements from witnesses. We'll also need to discuss your employment status until further notice. I'm not hiding, I said calmly. You know where to find me. The meeting ended without closure. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was motion. Outside the office, Rafia met my gaze. They're scared, she said quietly. They've never seen someone like you stand up to her. I smiled, weary but certain. They'll get used to it. When I got home, rain had begun tapping against the windows. The rhythm was soft, steady, like fingers reminding me that storms don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they just linger. I changed into a sweater, made tea, and let the sound fill the empty house. The phone rang again. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. Her voice came sharp, trembling at the edges. She's losing everything, Malina. Are you proud of yourself? I stared at the rain as it streaked down the glass. She earned what she's losing, Mom. I just stopped covering for her. She's your sister, she said. You're supposed to protect each other. I did. For years. I protected her lies, her image, her career. Now I'm protecting the truth. A pause. Then a sigh, heavy with disappointment that wasn't mine to carry anymore. You broke this family. I closed my eyes. No, Mom. I just stopped letting it break me. Her silence was colder than anger. Then she whispered, You sound just like your father when he walked out. That's not the insult you think it is, I said, and hung up. The tea had gone cold again. I poured it out and watched the steam vanish. Quietly, softly, I whispered, You can't fix what refuses to admit it's broken. Hours passed. The rain kept falling, steady as breath. When the knock came, I nearly didn't hear it. Rafia stood on the porch, hood pulled low, water dripping from her coat. She looked small against the storm. I brought something, she said. I stepped aside to let her in. She handed me a flash drive, its label written in shaky pen, Back up. In case they try to erase it, she said. You should have another copy. I turned it over in my hand. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. Her voice was quiet but firm. You taught me that silence only protects the wrong people. Inside the folder, there were more than backups. Testimonies. Typed, dated, signed. Students describing how a sold had dismissed their work, claimed their data, mocked their ideas. One even mentioned the days she humiliated me in class years ago, twisting my correction into a punchline. I felt something shift deep inside, heavier than gratitude, lighter than despair. I looked at Rafia. You understand what this means? She nodded. It means you're not alone anymore. The words hit harder than any accusation ever had. After she left, I sat at my desk again, reading through the statements one by one. Each paragraph was a small truth. Individually fragile. Together unshakable. I whispered, truth doesn't echo when spoken alone. But when it's carried by others, it thunders. Outside, lightning flashed behind the clouds, silent but bright. The rain continued, tapping gently like applause for something unseen. I leaned back in the chair, breathing slowly, letting the tension ease from my shoulders. The room smelled of wet air and paper. My reflection in the window looked calmer than it had in months. I thought about Isolde, how she must be spinning now, scrambling to rewrite the narrative, calling every contact she had left. For the first time, I felt no fear, no guilt. Only inevitability. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint glow from the monitor. The flash drive sat beside it, gleaming under the dim light, a small, ordinary object holding years of truth. As the rain softened to mist, I whispered to the quiet, the thunder's coming. And I meant it. 3 days had passed since the rain, since the email, since silence turned into something heavier. I woke that morning with no alarm, just a quiet knowing that this was the day something would shift. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But with the weight of inevitability. At the university, they called it a closed-door committee review. They didn't use the word hearing. That made it sound too legal. Too final. But when I walked into the HR conference room, with its long table and neutral carpeting and stacked folders, it felt exactly like judgment. Isolde wasn't there. Her absence felt tactical, like she was still controlling the narrative by choosing not to show up. That was always her way, silence when it mattered, presence when it impressed. I took the seat they offered me, the one at the far end of the table. The dean sat at the head, his hands folded carefully over a legal pad. 2 assistant provosts flanked him, their expressions polite but unreadable. An HR representative I'd never met introduced herself in a voice too bright for the room. Then they got to it. Dr. Harrow, the HR rep began, not meeting my eyes, thank you for submitting the materials. We've completed a preliminary review and convened this meeting to discuss the findings. The dean opened a folder, removed a printed statement, and read aloud. Based on the documents and corroborated witness accounts, we find evidence of gross misconduct and professional malpractice by Dr. Isolde Harrow. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. My hands were still, folded in my lap. I listened to the words like someone listening to the end of a long story they already knew by heart. Effective immediately, the statement continued, Dr. Harrow's teaching and supervisory privileges are suspended pending further investigation. Her past publications will be reviewed. Her degree credentials are now under formal scrutiny. There was no applause. No gasps. No satisfaction in the room. Just paper and protocol and the sound of something finally giving way. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It signs forms and sends emails. I nodded once. Thank you, I said, my voice even. The HR rep shifted uncomfortably. This process is confidential. We ask that you refrain from discussing any part of it with students or media. I smiled politely. Noted. But I said nothing more. Outside the building, the air was sharper than I expected. The leaves were turning, the edges curled and brittle like parchment. I walked slowly back toward the department hallway, where the bulletin board greeted faculty and students with updates and achievements. There, among the pinned flyers and upcoming seminar announcements, hung a printed notice. Effective immediately, Dr. Isolde Harrow has been placed on administrative leave. Someone had scrawled a comment in pen at the bottom corner. Just 3 words. About damn time. I didn't smile. But I breathed differently. The kind of breath that reaches places in your body you forgot needed air. That afternoon, another email landed in my inbox. This one wasn't from a person. Just an office. Subject, request for non-disclosure compliance. Sender, Human Resources Division. The message was brief. Given the sensitive nature of current investigations, we encourage all involved parties to refrain from public commentary. Institutional integrity remains a shared responsibility. Encourage. Refrain. Shared responsibility. They never said, don't speak. But they didn't have to. I forwarded the email to Rafia. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I added 2 words. Not happening. That night, the lights in my house stayed off longer than usual. I moved through the rooms by memory, letting the shadows settle around me like familiar fabric. Then my phone buzzed. One new message. Blocked number. You think this is over? I made this department. You'll always be nothing without it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Her words didn't sting like they used to. I typed slowly, carefully. Then burn with it. I hit send. Then I screenshot the exchange and archived it. Quietly. Softly. There was no anger left. Just clarity. For years, I had lived in the walls of her empire, quietly building things while she took the credit. Now those walls were crumbling, and she was still trying to shout over the dust. I turned off the phone, set it on the table beside the untouched tea, and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was fading into something soft and colorless. Not stormy. Not clear. In between. Somewhere in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I was free. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just unburdened. I leaned against the window frame and whispered to the dark, you can rebuild from silence, but not from lies. 2 weeks later, I was back on campus for the first time since the hearing. The air carried that faint sweetness of spring trying to be summer, the kind that made everything look almost normal again. Almost. I parked farther from the building than usual, more out of habit than fear. After what had happened, I didn't expect anyone to meet my eyes. Rafia found me before I reached the doors. She was holding a folded flyer, its corners damp with morning dew. Her eyes flicked between me and the paper. You should see this, she said, handing it over. Across the top, in glossy letters, Grand Opening, Harrow Academy for Advanced Sciences. I stared at the name. She really did it. Of course she did, Rafia replied, half smiling. But wait for it. She took out her phone and pulled up a photo. The same flyer, only someone had added a note in thick black marker, brought to you by the woman who silenced others. I handed the paper back, the corners trembling between my fingers. She'll never stop trying to reclaim the narrative. Rafia tilted her head. Maybe she's about to learn that not everyone believes her version anymore. The grand opening was that afternoon. I hadn't planned to go, but by noon the curiosity became unbearable. Some things you have to see to believe. The tutoring center stood 2 blocks from the university, a renovated storefront dressed in cheap celebration. Balloons, a red ribbon, a rented catering tent. I parked across the street, far enough to stay invisible, close enough to hear the nervous laughter of small talk. Isolde appeared in a pale blue suit, her hair done, her smile practiced. She greeted the small crowd, parents, reporters, a few professors pretending they hadn't been told not to associate. She reached for the ribbon-cutting scissors, then froze. Taped across the glass doors was a large photograph. It was the still frame from the lab video, the moment my hand caught her wrist, turning her attack into silence. Beneath it, written in black marker. She silenced others. Now she teaches? The noise from the crowd fell away. Someone gasped. Another person laughed, low, uncomfortable. A group of parents began whispering, phones already raised. The catering staff exchanged glances, unsure whether to keep serving. Isolde's hand shook slightly, though her smile didn't falter. She turned toward her assistant, voice clipped, take it down. But the assistant hesitated, sensing the futility. Cameras were already rolling. From my spot across the street, I could see everything reflected in the shop window, her face, the frozen crowd, the image of me larger than life behind her. She stole my spotlight, I murmured. Now it's blinding her. For the first time, I didn't feel pity or triumph. Just an odd kind of stillness, like watching a tide pull back into itself. By evening, photos of the scene flooded social media. The caption spread faster than any defense she could post. She silenced others. Now she teaches? The irony was too perfect, too poetic. The university, eager to distance itself, released a short statement, "We have no affiliation with this independent venture." When I arrived on campus the next day, people looked up as I walked past, then quickly looked away. Whispers trailed behind me but softened before reaching my ears. I moved through them like mist. In the science hall, the bulletin board by the main entrance had been cleared of old announcements. Only one new paper hung there now. A printed photo, me again, though not the one from the incident. This time, it was the image of me years earlier in uniform, standing tall in the lab, back straight, face calm. Beneath it, handwritten in simple black ink. She didn't raise her voice. But she ended the war. I stopped and stared for a long moment, unsure who had placed it there. Rafia, probably. Maybe someone else. Students passed, their voices hushed. No one touched the paper. No one dared. I reached up, fingertips brushing the corner, the texture of the tape warm from sunlight. I didn't take it down. Some truths deserve to stay visible. Later that afternoon, I crossed the courtyard toward the parking lot. Rafia caught up with me, her steps quick but quiet. "They reinstated your authorship credits," she said, catching her breath. "Check your email." When I did, the subject line glowed against the screen, "Correction notice, official authorship record." The message was short, "We've approved full authorship credit on your publications. We're sorry it took this long." I stared at the words until they blurred, then closed the phone. Rafia looked at me carefully. "You're not happy?" "I'm relieved," I said. "Happiness isn't the right word." We stood there for a moment, watching students hurry across the lawn, papers fluttering in their hands, laughter spilling from somewhere nearby. Life moving on, unaware of the years that had gone into earning that quiet correction. "I didn't need revenge," I said softly. "I just needed release." Rafia smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what winning really looks like." I nodded, but part of me wasn't sure. The cost of truth is rarely measured by what you gain. It's measured by what you lose and choose not to reclaim. As we walked toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the concrete. I could still see the poster in the hall through the glass doors, glowing faintly like a reminder carved in light. When I reached my car, I turned back to look at the building one more time. The place that had once taken my voice now held it on display. The email from the university buzzed again on my phone, but I didn't open it. Some apologies don't need acknowledgement. Some victories don't need witnesses. I started the engine and sat quietly, letting the hum fill the space where anger used to live. The world outside was moving again, students with backpacks, buses sighing at every stoplight, leaves swirling across the asphalt. Nothing monumental, nothing cinematic. Just life continuing, and me, still standing inside it. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing justice or running from pain. I was simply existing in the space between them. Softly, I whispered to myself, "You did what you came here to do." And somewhere, in the echo of that whisper, the air felt lighter. 2 weeks later, the air had changed. Not dramatically. Not like some cinematic shift. But subtly, like the way seasons change when you're not looking. One day you realize the wind has lost its edge, and light falls differently on the sidewalk. I noticed it first in the stillness of my home. Not the silence of tension, but the quiet that follows when noise no longer controls the room. A kind of peace that didn't announce itself, but settled in gently, like a guest that knew not to knock. That morning, I returned to the closet in my father's old study. I hadn't opened it since before his funeral. The lock clicked open softly, like it had been waiting for the right moment. Inside, tucked behind old certificates and a weathered fishing hat, was a wooden box. Smooth. Simple. Familiar. I brought it to my desk and opened it slowly. Letters. Dozens of them. Some folded neatly, some scribbled on yellowing legal pads. At the very bottom, one envelope stood out. My name. In his handwriting. I didn't cry. Not yet. I unfolded the letter, the paper creased but strong. Malina. I don't know when you'll find this. I don't know if you'll ever want to. But I needed you to hear this in my words, not your mother's, not your sister's, not the world's. I hope you've learned that strength isn't silence. It's not swallowing injustice or holding your tongue so others feel more comfortable. Real strength is speaking when it costs you everything. The words stopped me. My chest tightened, not from grief, but from the weight of being understood. Tenderly, I pressed the paper flat and read it again. Slowly. Carefully. Gently. No tears came, but my breath caught, once, then again. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. The wind was soft, the kind that brushed your skin like memory. I found his headstone where the ivy hadn't reached yet. Still solid. Still real. I placed the letter back into the box and set it gently at the foot of his grave. You didn't get to see me fight, I whispered. But I did. I'm not who they said I was. A breeze stirred the leaves. One fluttered across the stone, landed briefly on the box, then lifted again. It felt like acknowledgement. I stood there longer than I needed to, not to prove anything, just to be still with him. As I turned to leave, a car door shut behind me. I didn't look right away. I didn't have to. She stood near the path, arms folded, not tightly, not defensively. Just uncertain. Mom. We didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, she said, "You were right." I waited. She looked away. I didn't want to believe what she'd done. Because if it was true, then I failed both of you. In different ways. The words hung there, brittle and unfinished. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But I'm still healing." She nodded slowly, as if learning a language she'd never bothered to speak before. We stood there, side by side, but not touching. Two women with the same blood, the same regrets, trying to understand what came next. She whispered, "I never meant to choose sides." "You didn't have to," I replied gently. "You just had to look." She didn't argue. And that, for once, was enough. Later that week, I returned to campus. Just once. Just to walk through. The hallway where my photo had hung was clean now. The board freshly pinned with new flyers, research updates, student club meetings, job postings. No trace of the tribute. No trace of me. Still, I walked to the spot where it had been. I let my fingers brush the empty space. Not with sorrow. Not with longing. Just recognition. That wall had once held the version of me they refused to see. Now it was empty. Not erased. Cleared. Freedom wasn't loud. It was a whisper I finally let myself hear. As I walked out of the building, I carried nothing in my hands. No folders. No ID badge. No final papers. Just myself. I didn't need applause or closure or explanations. I just needed distance. When I reached the parking lot, the sun was setting behind the red brick buildings, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I paused at the edge, letting the light stretch across my shoes, then kept walking. I had never looked back so little. She lost everything trying to keep me small. I gained everything by letting myself stand. There are wars no one sees. And victories that leave no flags, just peace. Sometimes, the loudest justice comes in silence, and the strongest voice is the one that finally says, no more. Have you ever stood your ground against someone your whole family feared? Tell me in the comments, because your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from.